In the ruins of an ancient Roman cemetery, beneath cracked marble and creeping ivy, lies a stone worn smooth by centuries of wind. The Latin inscription is faint, almost lost to time, but the words are unmistakable. He lived 103 years. No name, no titles, no victories. Just a number. A number that defied everything we know about life and death in the ancient world. How could anyone live so long in Rome, a world where fever, plague, and war cut men down before 40? Where mothers buried half their children before they reached adulthood, and soldiers vanished in campaigns that swallowed whole legions. In an empire where emperors were poisoned, slaves beaten, and doctors trusted leeches more than logic, one man somehow lived to see 100 winters. Imagine his lifetime. He might have been born under Augustus, when Rome was at its golden height, and died under the rule of emperors his father had never dreamed of. He could have watched the aqueducts rise, seen the Colosseum's first games, felt the tremor of the crowd as gladiators fell. By the time his hands had grown thin and his hair white, generations had passed, and Rome herself had begun to gray. He had outlived his friends, his family, his own age. Who was he? A farmer who drank from clean mountain springs? A philosopher who found peace in the Stoic way? A soldier who laid down his sword to tend olive trees in the hills? His name is lost, but his endurance remains, carved into stone as the simplest, most extraordinary record of all. He lived. For most Romans, life was a brutal race against the clock. Disease stalked every alley. A simple cut could mean infection and death. Wine was safer than water, and the streets reeked of sewage and smoke. To reach old age was to perform a miracle daily, to eat wisely, to breathe clean air, to keep the mind sharp and the body steady amid chaos. And yet this man, this anonymous centenarian, achieved what emperors with all their wealth and healers could not. He endured. The question is not only how he lived so long, but why? What did he know that others did not? What rhythms did he follow? What habits did he keep that allowed him to survive in a world designed to shorten life? Ancient Rome was not without wisdom. Beneath its blood and marble, it was a civilization obsessed with balance. From the baths to the diet, from philosophy to medicine, Romans sought equilibrium. Their greatest minds, Pliny, Galen, Seneca, all believed that harmony was the root of longevity. To live well was not to live luxuriously, but to live in tune with nature, with reason, and with one's own limits. Perhaps that is the real secret carved into the tombstone. The man who lived past 100 did not conquer time. He accepted it. He moved with the seasons, not against them. He ate when hungry, rested when tired, worked when needed. He lived not like a god, but like a man who understood what it meant to be mortal. And in that understanding, he found something the rest of the empire never did: peace with the passage of years. As the camera lingers on the inscription, its letters illuminated by the dying Roman sun, a whisper seems to rise from the dust. He lived 103 years. In a world built on conquest, that was the greatest victory of all. To understand the miracle of one man's century-long life, we must first understand the world he lived in, a world where death was never far. Ancient Rome, for all its power and splendor, was built upon fragility. The marble and bronze, the legions and laurels, all were shadows cast over a civilization constantly at war with nature, disease, and itself. The average Roman lived no more than 40 years. Half of all children never reached adulthood. A mother might give birth 10 times and bury 6 of her children before her hair turned gray. Cities were crowded and unclean. The same aqueducts that carried fresh water also carried sickness. Rats ran through the alleys, dogs fed on refuse, and the Tiber, that proud river of empire, stank of waste. In the heart of the greatest civilization on earth, people still died of fevers, famine, and filth. Life expectancy depended on fortune as much as on virtue. A senator might dine on imported figs and fish from distant seas, yet die from gout or infection. A peasant, hardened by work and simplicity, might live longer simply because he had less. Rome's hospitals were temples, its medicines, guesswork. Physicians like Galen dissected animals to understand the human body and treated sickness with theory, not science. Remedies were drawn from superstition, crushed herbs, honey, vinegar, and prayer. A man with a toothache might be told his pain came from an angry spirit. A fever could be blamed on bad air or the wrath of the gods. Every day was a wager. Soldiers risked their lives for glory and pay. Farmers prayed that storms would spare their harvest. Merchants sailed seas haunted by pirates and shipwrecks. Even in the baths, symbols of civilization, danger lurked in the water. A small infection, a wound from a slave's chain, a bite from a rat. Each could be a death sentence. And yet, amid all this peril, Romans lived intensely. They understood the fleeting nature of life better than any people before them. Their motto, memento mori, remember you must die, was not a lament but a challenge. To live well was to defy death's inevitability, even for a moment. They sought meaning not in safety but in rhythm, in work, in family, in ritual. Each sunrise was a victory, each night a quiet surrender. For a man to live past 100 in this world, he would have needed more than luck. He would have needed harmony with his body, his mind, and his surroundings. He could not have been reckless nor idle. Perhaps he avoided the excesses of the wealthy, no feasts of roasted peacock or spiced wine that corroded the stomach. Perhaps he kept to the countryside, breathing clean air while tending his vines and fields. Perhaps he walked every day, slept with the sunset, and rose with the dawn. His longevity was not rebellion. It was obedience to nature's law. Imagine him in his final years, skin weathered like olive bark, hands still strong from labor, eyes reflecting both peace and distance. Around him, Rome changed, emperors rose and fell, wars came and went, yet his life endured quietly, untouched by ambition. The empire's grandeur faded. His heart did not. In that contrast lies the truth of the ancient world. Empires fall, but the humble endure. And in a time when death claimed millions before their prime, one man's long breath through a century was more than rare. It was sacred. He had not conquered the world. He had simply learned how to live within it. If the Roman Empire had a body, it would have been fed by bread, oiled by wine, and cleansed by water. The Romans believed that the key to survival lay not in luxury, but in balance, and nowhere was that belief more evident than in how they treated their own flesh. For a man to live past 100 in such an age, his body had to be a temple of moderation, built not on indulgence but on rhythm, the quiet wisdom of knowing when to eat, when to rest, and when to move. Roman health began with the stomach. "Let food be thy medicine," wrote Hippocrates centuries before, and Rome adopted that wisdom as law. The centenarian's diet would have been simple: bread of coarse wheat, olives pressed for oil, fish from clean streams, beans, herbs, honey. Meat was rare, a delicacy for festivals or soldiers, not for daily consumption. Instead, they favored grains, lentils, and fruits, food that nourished without burdening. Their wine was diluted with water, their meals small and regular. To eat until full was a sin against nature. To eat in measure was to honor it. In the city, gluttony killed as swiftly as war. The rich devoured meals that stretched for hours, eels drenched in garum, flamingo tongues, sweetened wines, and paid the price in sickness and decay. But the man who reached 100 likely lived far from marble halls. His meals were humble, his body lean and disciplined, his habits unchanged by vanity. Romans had a word for this, temperantia, moderation, and to them it was a virtue as powerful as courage. Yet food was only one part of their secret. Cleanliness, too, was sacred. The Roman bathhouse was not just a place to wash, it was the heartbeat of health, a ritual of renewal. Even the poorest citizen could enter the thermae to sweat, soak, and stretch. Steam opened the pores, cold water sealed them. Oils scented with herbs soothed the skin and the mind alike. In an age without soap, they used strigils, curved bronze scrapers, to cleanse their bodies of dust and fatigue. The bath was the equalizer of the empire. Senator and slave, merchant and soldier, all washed side by side beneath mosaics and columns, steam rising like incense to forgotten gods. Galen, the great physician of Rome, taught that the body was ruled by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was harmony among them, sickness, imbalance. The centenarian may never have read Galen's scrolls, but he lived by that truth. Too much wine? He balanced it with water. Too much sun? He sought shade. Too much work? He rested. To the Romans, balance was not a concept. It was survival. Exercise, too, was essential. The elderly in Rome were not idle. They walked, tilled, stretched, rode, and swam. Movement was medicine. Even soldiers, after years of campaign, retired to farm life. Their discipline carried into peace. It was said that a man who works the land works his soul as well. And perhaps that is why the old Roman lived so long, because he never stopped moving, never ceased to honor the daily rhythm that kept the heart alive. In every bathhouse and villa, in every field and forum, this truth was written not in ink, but in muscle and breath. Health was not bought, but practiced. The Romans feared idleness more than hunger, for they knew that stillness was death disguised as comfort. Our centenarian, then, was not extraordinary because he escaped the laws of nature, but because he obeyed them. His strength did not come from doctors or magic, but from the slow, deliberate art of living. He ate to live, worked to breathe, and rested to rise again. In his simplicity lay his immortality. The body may age, but the mind decides whether one grows old. In Rome, where the roar of ambition never ceased and the shadow of death hung over every banquet, the greatest strength was not muscle but discipline of thought. Those who endured learned to master the one force even emperors could not control: the self. Our centenarian might never have worn a philosopher's cloak, but his long life was likely guided by the quiet wisdom that filled Rome's air, the philosophy of Stoicism. Born from the teachings of Zeno, sharpened by Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, Stoicism taught that peace was not given by fortune, but forged in fire. The Stoic man did not run from hardship. He accepted it. He did not curse the storm. He learned to walk through it without losing his step. Remember, Seneca wrote, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Those words, carved into Roman thought, may have been the truest medicine of all. The man who lived past 100 surely understood that fear, envy, and rage aged the soul faster than any illness. In an empire where power meant paranoia and pleasure led to ruin, contentment was rebellion. The Stoics taught moderation not only in food and drink, but in emotion. They believed that virtue, courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom was the only true good. Everything else, wealth, fame, comfort, was a distraction. To live long, one had to live rightly. A tranquil mind, they said, kept the body in harmony. Perhaps our centenarian was not born noble, but lived nobly in his own way. Perhaps he rose each morning with the sunrise, worked without complaint, spoke little, and sought no glory. He might have lost sons to war, crops to drought, or friends to plague, yet still greeted each day with calm acceptance. For the Stoics, life was a gift and death a duty, both to be met with the same steady breath. Even emperors bowed to that truth. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, wrote in his Meditations, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." For Rome's wisest, awareness of mortality was not despair, but direction. Every moment mattered precisely because it could be the last. Our old Roman may have lived by that creed, savoring small joys, refusing to waste his heart on anger or grief. His long life was not a triumph over time, but an alliance with it. He did not fight the passing of years. He welcomed them as old friends. Where others saw decline, he saw rhythm. Where others feared change, he found peace in its constancy. In that way, he mirrored the very philosophy that built Rome's resilience. For what is Stoicism, if not the architecture of the soul, a structure built to withstand fate's storms, just as concrete withstood the centuries? His body, disciplined and clean, his mind, tranquil and unwavering. Together they formed a fortress that no sickness or sorrow could easily breach. As Rome raged and decayed around him, he remained still, like a statue carved from serenity itself. The world aged and fell, but he endured, one breath, one meal, one sunrise at a time. In the end, perhaps it was not his heart that was strong, but his will that was unbreakable. The Stoics believed that the greatest victory was to conquer oneself. Our centenarian had done exactly that. If the mind was Rome's compass, then medicine was its fragile map, a field drawn in trial, error, and faith. For most of Roman history, healing was an art as much as a science, practiced by men who mixed philosophy with herbs, faith with anatomy. The man who lived to 100 would have been both student and patient of that ancient craft, guided by its wisdom and spared by its restraint. Roman medicine began not in temples, but in the earth. The old healers, Medici and Herbari, understood that nature offered remedies before men built theories. They ground mint for digestion, burned sage for infection, mixed honey with vinegar for wounds. Garlic, fennel, and thyme were not mere spices, but medicine for blood and breath. Wine cleansed wounds, olive oil soothed joints. Every home was a small apothecary, and every mother a healer. For greater illnesses, the Romans turned to the god Aesculapius, whose temples stood at the heart of cities and hills alike. Pilgrims slept in his sanctuaries, believing dreams would reveal their cures. Priests would interpret their visions and prescribe treatments, walks in the sun, baths in sacred waters, prayers whispered to marble statues. And while such rituals might seem primitive to us, they reflected a truth that modern medicine sometimes forgets. The will to live often heals more than the medicine itself. By the time of our centenarian's youth, Roman medicine had advanced through the genius of Galen. He dissected animals to learn the secrets of the body and declared that health was harmony, the balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was imbalance, and treatment was the art of restoring order. Bleeding, purging, massage, and diet were the tools of his trade. It was not perfect, but it worked more often than chance. Yet the wisest Romans knew that too much medicine could be worse than too little. Pliny the Elder warned that doctors killed more than they cured. The true healer, he said, was moderation. A calm spirit, clean habits, good air, and regular rest were the best prescriptions. And so our centenarian, far from the bustling surgeries of the city, might have followed his own quiet regimen. Fresh herbs from his garden, honey water in the morning, olive oil rubbed into his skin after a long day's work. Massage, the unctio, was more than luxury, it was daily ritual. The old Roman would visit the bathhouse, sweat in the caldarium, rinse in the cold frigidarium, and then lie still as warm oil was poured upon his limbs. The masseur's hands would knead the tension from his muscles, as if pushing away the years themselves. The scent of rosemary and myrrh would fill the air. It was therapy for body and soul, a communion between man and the earth that made him. And when illness inevitably came, fever, pain, or weakness, the Romans did not hide from it. They listened. They rested. They believed the body spoke in symptoms, not punishments. The man who lived a century surely learned to respect that language. He would have known when to work and when to yield, when to eat and when to fast, when to walk and when to sleep. His longevity was not defiance of nature's limits, but trust in its wisdom. Even in old age, when bones ached and sight dimmed, he would still rise with purpose. Perhaps he sat by a fire, sipping watered wine, listening to the echoes of youth in the crackle of the flames. His healer was not Galen or a priest, but the life he lived, steady, mindful, and free of excess. He had not escaped disease, he had befriended it. He had not cured aging, he had accepted it. In his calm, he found renewal. And in that balance between care and surrender, between the art of medicine and the philosophy of peace, he discovered the truest secret of all. To live long is not to fear death. It is to live well enough that death forgets your name. Far from the fevered heart of Rome, where smoke from 10,000 hearths darkened the sky and the streets never slept, there existed another world, slower, quieter, eternal. It was in the countryside, among olive groves and vineyards, that the man who lived past 100 likely spent his years. There, the rhythm of life was set not by clocks or emperors, but by the turning of the sun and the breath of the seasons. To live long in the ancient world was to live with nature, not above it. The old Roman would have risen with the dawn, when the first light brushed the fields, gold and dew clung to the grass. His mornings began not with rush, but with purpose. Feeding animals, pruning vines, tilling the earth. Every task was slow and deliberate, the kind of labor that strengthened the body without exhausting it. His muscles stayed lean, his lungs clear, his heart steady, because his life was movement in harmony, not violence against time. His meals were shaped by the land. What he ate in summer, figs, cucumbers, soft cheese, barley, changed with the harvest. In winter, he relied on stored grains, dried fruits, and honeyed wine. He ate what the earth offered and no more. For Romans like him, gluttony was seen not only as a moral weakness, but as a betrayal of nature's rhythm. To overindulge was to invite decay. Simplicity was strength. At midday, when the sun burned high, he rested in the shade of a cypress or under the clay roof of his villa. This pause, the meridiatio, was sacred, a gift to the body. Rome's workers, soldiers, and peasants all knew that rest was part of labor, not its opposite. The old man may have napped briefly, then bathed in cool water drawn from a nearby stream, letting the flow wash away fatigue and dust. Evenings were for reflection. As shadows lengthened, he might have walked through his fields, listening to the cicadas hum, his sandals brushing through stalks of grain. He would watch the horizon fade from gold to purple, and in that hour of stillness, he would feel time not as an enemy, but as a companion, gentle, steady, unhurried. The same sun that once rose over his youth still set upon his age, and that continuity gave him peace. The Romans believed that health and virtue grew in the soil. The philosopher Cato wrote that the best life was that of the farmer, honest, frugal, strong. To till the land was to understand the gods, for in every seed planted was the promise of rebirth. And so, in tending his crops, our centenarian tended his own spirit. The earth rewarded patience with longevity. It loved those who moved with its pulse. In the city, ambition devoured years. In the countryside, time was circular, the same tasks, the same cycles, endlessly renewing. It was a slower eternity, measured not in victories but in seasons. To wake with the sun, to eat from one's labor, to sleep beneath the whispering stars. This was not poverty, it was freedom, and perhaps this was his truest secret. The man who lived a century did not chase life, he walked beside it. His world was smaller than Rome's marble sprawl, but infinitely deeper. He did not count his days, he lived them fully, each one a complete circle of labor, rest, and gratitude. In the quiet of nature, time ceases to be a threat. It becomes a song, one that only the patient can hear. And our old Roman, listening for 100 years, must have known every note by heart. By the time the old Roman reached his 100th year, the empire he was born into had changed beyond recognition. The marble of Augustus had cracked. New emperors wore the purple. Old gods were being forgotten while new faiths whispered through the streets. Yet he endured, a living monument among ruins, the last page of a story still being written. Imagine him sitting by the doorway of his modest villa, a wool cloak over his shoulders, watching the road where his grandchildren played. His eyes, dim but clear, had seen more of Rome than any historian could ever record. He had watched boys become soldiers, soldiers become ghosts. He had seen triumphs, betrayals, and rebirths. The laughter of youth no longer stirred him to envy. It stirred memory. To live that long in Rome was not only a blessing, it was a burden of memory. He remembered the empire when it still believed itself immortal, when roads stretched like veins across the world, when marble temples gleamed, and the Senate's voice could shake kingdoms. He remembered the markets filled with olive oil and laughter, the bathhouses echoing with gossip, the festivals where music poured into the night. But now, so much of it was gone, swallowed by decay, by time's slow hand. To outlive a civilization's prime was to live in the ghost of its glory. And yet, he did not mourn. The Stoics had taught him long ago that all things change, that empires fall as leaves do, and to resist that truth is to suffer needlessly. Perhaps he whispered to himself the words of Marcus Aurelius. Everything we see is changing. You yourself are subject to continual change and destruction, and so is the whole universe. He did not fear the fading of Rome. He accepted it as part of nature's eternal rhythm. The young came to him for stories, not advice. To them, he was a relic, a man who had seen the age of emperors they only knew from coins. He told them of plagues that darkened the sky, of soldiers marching to the Rhine, of summers when the harvest failed, and winters when wolves came down from the hills. But he also told them of beauty, of mornings when the fields shone silver with dew, of the first taste of new wine, of the laughter of his wife, long gone but never forgotten. As he spoke, time folded. The past became alive again, not as history, but as heartbeat. His life had become Rome's memory, not written in books, but carried in breath and bone. He had outlasted his children, his emperor, and perhaps even the faith of his youth. But in the quiet of his old age, he had come to see continuity where others saw loss. The same sun still rose over his vineyards. The same earth still fed him. Rome, though crumbling, still lived in its people, in him. When night came, he would look to the stars, the same constellations that guided sailors and soldiers centuries before. Somewhere in that vast Roman sky, he saw no gods, no omens, only the gentle truth that everything endures in some form. The empire that built the world would die, but its wisdom, its roads, its walls, its people, they would echo forever. He, too, would soon be part of that echo. But there was no fear in him now. His life had already stretched beyond measure. He had witnessed more than any man could hope to see. To die after 100 years was not tragedy. It was the final act of balance, a bow to the rhythm that had carried him all his days. As the fire dimmed beside him and the wind rustled through olive leaves, perhaps he smiled, not at what he had done, but at what he had endured. He had lived through the rise and fall of worlds, and now, as night came softly, he knew, even as his breath left him, life, eternal, cyclical, Roman, would go on. When dawn rose on the day he did not wake, the fields outside his villa were quiet. The vines shimmered with dew, the olive trees stood still, and the light fell gently across the threshold where he had so often sat. The man who had lived 103 years had finally gone to sleep. Not defeated, not taken, but released. His neighbors buried him near the road, beneath a small stone that bore no title, no lineage, no claim to greatness. Only the words that outshone all others. He lived 103 years. To modern eyes, that number is impressive. To ancient Rome, it was miraculous. How had he done it? This simple man who had no physician's tools, no modern comfort, no knowledge of medicine beyond herbs and prayer. The answer, whispered through every chapter of his life, wasn't found in any potion or ritual, but in harmony. He had mastered the oldest truth of all, that to live long, one must live well. He did not chase glory or fear death. He lived as nature commanded, with rhythm, with measure, with grace. He rose when the light came, ate from the land that fed him, worked with his hands, and spoke little of what he could not change. He kept his mind clear and his heart steady. He did not drown in wine or greed or rage. He lived each day as the Romans once believed life should be lived, as an act of virtue. Modern science, centuries later, would prove that he had unknowingly lived by perfect design. His diet of grains, fruits, fish, and olive oil matched what doctors now call the Mediterranean ideal, rich in natural oils and balance. His daily labor was exercise, his rest was real, his stress was minimal, his community close. He walked under the sun, breathed clean air, and slept with darkness. Every habit that now fills modern wellness guides was simply his way of being. He lived as the earth intended, and the earth rewarded him with time. But beyond the body, it was his philosophy that preserved him. He had practiced the Stoic art of peace, accepting fate, controlling only what lay within his grasp, and greeting every day with calm endurance. He had understood what emperors and generals never could, that power cannot defy decay, but wisdom can outlast it. His strength was not defiance, but surrender. And in that surrender, he found victory. To live past 100 was to live beyond ambition. He had become a witness to the turning of ages, the passing of gods, the crumbling of empire. He had learned to see beauty in impermanence, to know that the olive that withers will bear fruit again, that life itself is a cycle of death and renewal. His century was not a conquest, but a communion. When his tombstone was carved, the mason who cut those words, 103 years may not have understood their full weight, but he carved them deeply, knowing they would last. And perhaps, as the chisel struck stone, he thought of the world the old man had seen, the wisdom he carried, and how rare it was to live long enough to understand life itself. 2,000 years later, his stone still stands, weathered but legible. Travelers pause before it, tracing the faint letters with their fingers, wondering about the man who lived when Rome ruled the earth. They see the number and think of luck, of fate, of mystery. But the truth is simpler and far more profound. He lived long because he lived in balance, with the land, with his labor, with his heart. The Romans called this virtues, the courage to live rightly. And it was that virtue, not medicine or magic, that made him eternal. As the camera pulls away from his grave, the wind stirs through the olive trees. The sun rises as it always has. Life continues, steady, patient, infinite. Because in the end, the true secret of the Roman who lived past 100 was never about defeating time. It was about learning to walk beside it,